Today when we go to the polls, we get a little sticker that says, "I voted," and that's great. But you know what would be even better? Cake. And that is exactly what you got when you went to vote in colonial New England. So thank you to Squarespace for sponsoring this video as I do my civic duty by baking some election cake, this time on Tasting History. So I don't often revisit a dish here on the channel, but back when I first started the channel, back in 2020, I actually made an election cake from 1896, and I talked a little bit about the history, but it was in a Q&A live stream, and I thought that it was worth giving a dedicated episode to this food. But this time, I'm going back an entire century to 1796. The recipe is perhaps the first published recipe for election cake, and it makes a cake that is absolutely massive. It's from American Cookery by Amelia Simmons, and it calls for 30 quarts flour, 10 pounds butter, 14 pounds sugar, 12 pounds raisins, 3 dozen eggs, 1 pint wine, 1 quart brandy, 4 ounces cinnamon, 4 ounces fine colander seed, 3 ounces ground allspice. Wet the flour with the milk to the consistency of bread overnight, adding 1 quart yeast. The next morning, work the butter and sugar together for half an hour, which will render the cake much lighter and whiter. When it has risen light, work in every other ingredient except the plums, which work in when going into the oven. Like I said, absolutely massive cake. I'm going to be cutting this to 1/30th of the original recipe, and it's still going to make a very, very large cake, but I'm not making enough for an entire town to have an election. Besides the size of the cake, what's interesting is the way that it is leavened. It is a yeast leavened cake. This recipe comes from just before they started using baking soda. But even then, it's not the usual way that a yeast leavened cake is made, at least the ones that I've made. You're making bread dough and using that to mix in with the batter to leaven the cake. Like I said, I've never made anything like this, and I kind of think it might not work. Could end up being a disaster, but we're in this together. So for this recipe, what you'll need is 4 cups or 500 grams of flour, 1.5 cups or 350 milliliters of milk, 2 tablespoons or 18 grams of active dry yeast, and a half cup or 120 milliliters of flat beer. The beer is because at the time it would have been ale barm that they used for the yeast, so this should approximate the flavor a little bit more than water, but you can also just use water. So stir the yeast into the beer and let it sit for about 10 minutes until it becomes nice and foamy. And while it sits, you can mix the flour and milk together in a large bowl, and you should get a very, very dry dough. Once it's mixed, add the yeast mixture and mix it into the dough. If it's too wet to come together, add a couple spoonfuls of flour, but just enough so that it comes together to form a rough dough, and then cover it up and let it rise. Now it says to let it rise overnight, but this cake would have been made in New England in late April or early May. We'll get to why that is later, but so it would be pretty chilly at night. I looked at the temperatures from the late 18th century, and you're going to want to put this into the refrigerator overnight. If you don't want to put it in the refrigerator, it only needs about 2 hours to rise. The next morning you can take it out of the fridge, uncover it, let it return to room temperature, and while you do that, you can gather the rest of your ingredients, which are a heaping cup or 180 grams of raisins, 1.5 sticks or 170 grams of butter, 1 1/8 cup or 225 grams of sugar, 2 eggs, a quarter cup or 60 milliliters of brandy, 2 tablespoons or 30 milliliters of a sweet wine, 1 tablespoon of cinnamon, 1 tablespoon coriander, and 2 teaspoons of allspice. First, you want to plump your raisins by soaking them in some cool water for about 20 minutes, during which time you can add your butter and your sugar to a bowl and beat until they are nice and fluffy. The more you beat them, the better. Then add the eggs and beat until they're just incorporated, and then add the brandy and wine and mix, and then add all of your spices and stir until everything is mixed throughout. Then take this batter and mix it in with the risen bread dough. And let me tell you, it is not easy to mix these two substances. They do not want to come together. But if you just keep at it, eventually they sort of will. Once you have finished mixing, or once you get bored of mixing, cover it up and let it rise for another 30 to 40 minutes. While you prepare a large cake pan, I am using a 10-inch round pan, but you can use 2 smaller pans or several loaf pans. You're going to butter the bottom and sides and line it with parchment. Then drain your raisins and toss them in some flour. This will make it so they don't sink to the bottom of the cake. And it's funny in the recipe because in the list of ingredients she calls them raisins, but then at the end she calls them plums. So she goes back and forth. And if you didn't know that raisins were called plums at that time, you'd be mighty confused. Luckily I do know that, but otherwise you'd be like, where'd the plums come from? Also, it makes me wonder, should I do a video on sugar plums? Because they are neither raisins nor plums, but maybe around Christmas I could do sugar plums. They're a lot of work. Maybe I'll do that. Anyway, once the raisins are floured, incorporate them into your risen cake batter and pour it into the cake pan about 2/3 full. Level it and set it in the oven at 375 Fahrenheit or 190 Celsius and bake for about 45 minutes or until it is baked through. Again, when I started this process, I really did not think that it was going to work, but just a few minutes in the oven and the yeasted cake was beginning to rise. One might say it is an election day miracle, which raises the question, why on earth were people eating these massive cakes on election day? Election cake started out as a decidedly New England food, mostly in Connecticut and Massachusetts. And it was baked not in November, when we hold most of our elections today here in the US, but sometime between late April and early June, because that's when they held their elections, because they weren't presidential elections. In Connecticut, Election Day was meant to elect the colony's governor, a privilege most colonies didn't have at all. Typically, the governor was appointed by the king, but in Connecticut and at different times Rhode Island and Massachusetts, they had the right to elect their own governor, and they took that right very seriously. Election Day was a very important day. It was one of the few days throughout the year where everybody in the colony, at least all of the men, came together into one central location in the capital. But it wasn't just to vote, but also to visit friends and family and to listen to a very long sermon. It was one of the most important sermons of the year because not only was it delivered to a large audience, but often to the governor as well. And so the preacher took advantage of the captive audience. Some of the most important speeches of 17th century New England came in the form of these election day sermons. And when I say that they were long, I mean they could go on for hours. We have some of them because they would publish them afterwards, and sometimes they were between 15 and 20,000 words. It's like a novella. And so I'm sure that it worked up an appetite for both the orator and the audience, but luckily afterward there was a lot of cake to be had. Now, exactly when these election cakes began to be made is not known, but the location that became most associated with them was Hartford, Connecticut. And Connecticut, just like Massachusetts, was a Puritan colony, and so they were sorely lacking in holidays. They didn't really do Christmas and Easter and Whitsun and all of those. They would just go to church. It was another day for church. But a holiday, not so much. And then there were holidays like May Day, where in England and much of Europe people really celebrated, but they not only didn't celebrate those, they actually outlawed them. But even Puritans need some sort of frivolity, and so the big holiday of the year became Election Day. Election Day, the reddest lettered in our calendar, brightened the whole year. Good housekeepers were expected to have finished their spring cleaning long before, and fire irons and brasses were papered and put away in the garret. Do these guys know how to party or what? Yeah, it's a different time. But one thing that marked the occasion, other than spring cleaning, was the preparation of election cake. The cake making began a week beforehand, this delectable compound testing the talents and strengths of a cook as nothing else could possibly do. And a Hartford family that cannot recite some tradition connected with it has no claims to antiquity. Mothers sat up all night to watch the batch of 12 or 20 loaves, or called their daughters long before cock-crowing to make investigations. Nay, some were known to faint from fatigue while mixing the materials. In Hartford, Election Day landed on the second Thursday in May, and it wasn't just a day, but an entire week of festivities. There were, of course, the elections, though sometimes actually the elections took place well before, and this was more the installing of whoever got elected. But regardless, there was the political aspect, but then there were days of going around and seeing friends and family that you hadn't seen all year. And when you went to someone's house, they would give you a slice of their election cake. Though there was also usually a really massive election cake given to everyone by the town, and it's kept in the town center during a big old party. In the public records of the colony of Connecticut, it shows that the local council paid for a huge celebration for everyone on Election Day in 1771. They paid for people to have tobacco and barrels of alcoholic cider and porterage, as well as the ingredients for what would have been an absolutely massive election cake. The bill came from an Ezekiel Williams Esquire and charged £2 7 shillings 9 pence for the raisins, cloves, mace, sugar, etc. for the cake, then another 5 shillings 10 pence for the flour, and £2 5 pence to a Mrs. Ledley for doing the baking. So it was about £5 to make this cake. And that would be like $1,500, give or take, right now. So that was a really, really expensive cake. Now, even after the colonial period, in Hartford, Election Day still was like the major holiday of the year. As late as 1809, there was a traveler who went to Hartford who wrote about the festivities. On the evening following that of the election day, there is an annual ball at Hartford called the Election Ball, and on the succeeding Monday, a second, which is more select. The election day is a holiday throughout the state, and even the whole remainder of the week is regarded in a similar light. Servants and others are now in some measure indemnified for the loss of the festivals of Christmas, Easter, and Whitsuntide, which the principles of their church deny them. Families exchange visits and treat their guests with slices of election cake, and thus preserve some portion of the luxuries of the forgotten feast of the Epiphany. I like that he points out that all of the other holidays that servants would have off in the rest of the new United States did not really apply in Connecticut. In Connecticut, you're working Christmas. Now, while election cake might have started out as a Hartford tradition, it did not stay that way, and that is in part due to the cookbook that we are cooking from today. See, American Cookery was first published in Hartford, Connecticut, and later in New York, but the book was a hit far beyond New England and helped to spread New England dishes to other parts of the U.S., foods like pumpkin pie, turkey, and cranberries, and it also spread a recipe for something that the Dutch families of the area called a cookie. Those foods obviously had a little bit more staying power, seeing as we still eat them today. I love a cookie. But election cake did make the rounds for a while, and by the mid-19th century, there were recipes showing up all the way in California and Oregon. Though even as the cake spread, the importance of it really kind of remained a Hartford thing. But even there, that was not to last. In 1867, the Hartford Courant printed an article where a Hartford lady reminisced on the cake's importance in earlier decades. Will somebody who remembers it all tell about election in old times in Hartford? Oh, the quantities of cake! A batch of election cake was 12 loaves, but there had to be more than one batch, and plenty of sponge cake with it. You didn't wear your white frock, but your new calico, best bonnet, and red shoes. And you went down street to see the governor come into town. The streets were crowded, the bells rang, lots of money to spend. Children could have a cent any time they asked for it, election day. And cake, a big piece, not a slice, every time they ran into the house. Nobody dared refuse them. It stands ready all day for wagons full of country friends and acquaintances come to see the parade. All must eat loaf cake and tell what luck they had with theirs. If you go to the neighbors, you must eat a piece, of course. The cake didn't really disappear, but it was no longer part of an event. And even though recipes appear throughout the 19th and into the early 20th century, all of the events surrounding it were forgotten and never known to most of the people eating them. The story of election cake would appear here and there in newspapers around the country throughout the 20th century, but for the most part, yeasted cake was just not really something that appealed to people anymore, and so it was more of a novelty relegated to the page and not to the actual kitchen. That is, until now, because, shockingly, my 18th century election cake actually has risen and should be about ready to eat. So once it's baked, let your cake cool to room temperature before slicing. And here we are, Hartford election cake from 1796. I gotta say, I thought that this thing was gonna be dry, but the moment I sliced into it, it's still really moist and held together and rose. It's not too dense, or at least it doesn't look too dense. Call me flabbergasted, though. Let's taste it. That is really moist. Like, that was surprisingly good. And the flavors keep developing. I feel like this is going to be one of those things where actually it tastes better tomorrow than it does today, or even in 2 days, because all of the spices, they're going to really permeate the cake and kind of come together a little bit more. Shockingly good. I have to say, I did not expect to like this. Did not think that I would recommend it, but I am recommending it. The other one that I made a few years ago, it used like chemical leavener, so I thought that that would be, this is better. This is really, really good. You should make it if you got some time. I mean, it takes some time, but really quite nice. And so I'll put the recipe for that, as always, up on my website. You can also sign up for the Tasting History newsletter over on my website, tastinghistory.com, which I made with a bit of help from today's sponsor, Squarespace. Squarespace makes it easy to create a beautiful and user-friendly website to help you engage with your audience. And whether you're building for personal use or for your business, Squarespace can help you set up so you can sell access to your content, like blogs or online courses, as well as sell physical products. And Squarespace Payments is the easiest way to manage your payments all in one place while giving customers the option of using a number of popular payment methods, including Apple Pay and Afterpay. Best of all, they let you keep in contact with your customers, or in my case, with my viewers, via their wonderful email campaigns. So if you're looking to build a website, then head to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/tastinghistory to get 10% off of your first purchase of a website or domain. And I will see you next time on Tasting History.